I thought my marriage was perfect until I checked my husband's phone at 4 a.m. What I found? Messages with 50 plus. Women, a fake identity, and a double life I never saw coming. Me, 26F, and my husband, 26M, have been married for almost 3 years together for 4. We started off as friends, and after multiple attempts to get out of the friend zone, he finally did. After one night we spent together talking and laughing all night. I fell in love with him shortly after, and things got serious pretty quickly. I fell for him hard. He was the first person in almost a year that was able to bring my walls down and show me unconditional love. Prior to him, I was in an emotional and borderline physically abusive relationship. Anyways, for the past few months, I have been getting this feeling that something is off. I kept confiding in my nail tech that I see every 2-3 weeks. She kept telling me to check his phone. Firstly, I never have been the type of woman to go through my partner's phone. Secondly, I didn't know his password until today. Well, tonight I did it. We laid down for bed, and when he fell asleep, I felt this overwhelming sense to check. I sat next to the bed on the floor for 2 hours going through everything. I found messages between him and his ex, both confessing their undying love for each other, talking about their marriages, talking about explicit XXX things. She is also married and has 3 kids and I think is pregnant with 1. He has an OnlyFans subscription to multiple women and has been messaging over 50+ women on social media and has dating apps where he uses the name Carlos, obviously not using his real name. I took pictures of everything I could find. Videos, messages between him and his cousin talking about a girl my husband has been talking to. He has been doing this with multiple women for our entire marriage. Also, in some messages, I am sure he has met up with at least one girl at night. He goes out with his coworkers, which I have never had a problem with. I am sick to my stomach. I always told myself if I ever caught him cheating, I would leave. I don't know what to do. It's 4:25 a.m. my time and he's still asleep. I'm sorry if there's typos or misspelling, my hands are shaking, and TBH, I have no one else to talk to about this. Update 1. So I barely slept after finding all that last night. Just lay there with my mind racing, thinking about every little moment from the past 3 years that now felt like a huge lie. Like when he was so sweet helping me recover from my last breakup, showing me how I deserved better, well, he was busy running around behind my back this whole time. The man I thought was my partner, my best friend, had this whole other life going on, and I'm just supposed to go on like everything's normal? When he got up, I pretended to be asleep, and he just went about his morning routine, whistling even. He kissed me goodbye like he always does, but it felt so cold this time. He didn't even notice I was shaking, didn't notice anything different. As soon as he left, I sat up staring at the door, just numb. It's like I was living in someone else's life, like my reality had been swapped in the middle of the night. I knew I had to figure out what to do next. My hands were still shaking, but I picked up my phone and called my best friend. She's been through a rough divorce herself, and I knew she'd get it, but I couldn't even get the words out at first. Just hearing her voice was enough to make me start crying. When I finally told her what happened, she was quiet for a while. Then she just said, "Pack a bag, come stay with me for a few days." It felt like she was giving me permission to break down, to let go of the strong front I'd been keeping up. But I told her I couldn't leave. Not yet. I didn't want to just walk away and let him get away with everything without facing me. Plus, I had so much proof now, it was like I'd turned into this detective overnight, and I needed a plan. After getting off the phone, I went through all the evidence again, feeling sick to my stomach every time I looked at another message. Messages to his ex, to random women, to his cousin about his flings. He was just chatting away, sharing little details of our life like they were jokes, all while acting like I was the love of his life. Then, something clicked in my head, like a little spark. I realized I needed more than just the texts. I needed a full, foolproof case if I was going to confront him. My mind went back to a friend I knew from work who was good with tech stuff. I reached out, careful not to say too much over the phone, just asked if they could meet up for coffee and help me with a small project. Luckily, they agreed, and I had a coffee date set up for later that day. I figured if anyone could help me back up all these files securely and maybe even dig a little deeper, it was them. In the meantime, I did what my friend suggested and started packing a bag, just in case. Not too much, Just a couple of essentials so I could make a quick escape if things got too heated later. I put in my phone charger, some clothes, basic stuff, but when I looked around the house we'd built together, all these memories we'd made, it hit me just how much he'd taken away from me. Every picture frame, every little decoration that we'd picked out together, even down to the ugly green mug he bought me when I first moved in, it all felt tainted. I grabbed that mug and threw it in the trash, probably harder than I needed to, but it felt oddly satisfying. So I met up with my tech friend, and they were beyond amazing. We sat down, and I showed them all the stuff I'd gathered. They didn't pry, just asked how I wanted everything stored. After an hour or so, they helped me set up a cloud folder that only I could access. We backed up everything, the messages, screenshots, even the little video clips I'd taken. They even showed me how to create a backup on a USB just in case, and I felt a little better knowing I had all the evidence safe. Before leaving, my friend looked at me and said, "Whatever you decide to do, just remember you don't have to figure it all out at once. Take it one step at a time." I went back home, feeling a bit more prepared, but still absolutely wrecked inside. The whole way home, I kept running through how I was going to confront him. Every possible scenario played out in my mind, from calmly sitting him down to just screaming at him, throwing his things out the door, demanding answers. But when I got home, I saw a new message on his laptop, this time from his cousin, who he'd been talking to about meeting up with some girl. The cousin was asking if he was in the clear for tomorrow night. I froze, realizing that he wasn't even planning on stopping anytime soon. For some reason, seeing that message from his cousin was the final straw. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to sit around waiting for him to confess or play the nice, understanding wife. I started crafting my own plan. I thought back to all the stuff he'd said in those messages about being so sneaky and untouchable, like I'd never find out. So, I decided to turn his own games against him. Instead of blowing up, I started acting super nice, like nothing had changed. He got home that evening, and I greeted him with a smile, even asked about his day. I saw him relax a little, like he wasn't expecting that at all, which just made it clearer that he was hiding everything, feeling safe and secure in his little double life. I was barely holding it together, but I knew I had to play along if I wanted to get any real answers. Over dinner, I even threw in a casual question about his cousin, just to see how he'd react. He looked a little surprised, but quickly covered it up, saying they'd been talking about a family thing. I smiled, acting like I bought it, but inside I was fuming. I decided that I'd follow him when he went out with his cousin the next night. If he thought he could keep lying to my face, I was going to make sure he knew just how wrong he was. So here I am, lying in bed, pretending to be asleep while he's snoring next to me, plotting for tomorrow. I'm exhausted, emotionally wrecked, but something in me has changed. I don't feel like the same person who woke up yesterday morning, clueless about everything going on behind my back. Now I feel like I'm on a mission, and there's no way I'm backing down without knowing the full truth. Update 2. I woke up early, barely slept at all, but the few hours I did catch were filled with dreams of all the ways this could go down. It's like I was caught in this weird mix of heartbreak and excitement, knowing I was finally going to see who he really was. The plan was simple. Follow him and see where he actually goes when he claims he's out with his cousin. I kept going over my steps, trying to stay calm. All I had to do was keep up the act a little longer and get solid proof. Then, if I needed to leave, I'd have all the closure I needed, no questions left. When he got up, I forced myself to act normal. He kissed me goodbye, said he'd be back by midnight after his family thing. The way he said it was so casual, almost like he was mocking me, and I had to fight the urge to just snap and tell him I knew everything. Instead, I smiled and said I hoped he'd have fun. As soon as he left, I waited a few minutes, then grabbed my keys and slipped out. He thought he was so smooth, but he had no idea I'd put a tracking app on his phone while he was in the shower that morning. It was a temporary thing I'd set up with my tech friend's help, just for today, so I could see his location in real time. I started my car and waited until he'd been on the road for a few minutes before heading out myself. My heart was pounding as I drove, watching his little dot moving on the map. It felt like I was living in some crime drama, except this was my real life. I followed him for about 20 minutes until he pulled up to this random bar downtown, not exactly a spot I'd imagine his family hanging out. I parked a few blocks down, just far enough that he wouldn't notice me. After he went inside, I waited for about 10 minutes, giving him some time to settle in, then made my way to the bar. I walked in, scanning the room, and saw him right away. He was at a booth in the back, sitting with this woman who was definitely not his cousin. She looked familiar, and then it hit me. She was one of the women I'd seen in his messages, someone he'd been talking to for weeks, calling her babe and planning meetups. Seeing them together made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to stay calm, blending into the crowd near the bar where I could watch without being obvious. They were talking, laughing, leaning in close. It was painfully obvious this wasn't just a casual meetup, and the way he looked at her. I felt like a fool for ever believing he only had eyes for me. I snapped a few pictures just for my own sanity and decided I'd seen enough. But as I turned to leave, they stood up and headed for the door. Panic surged through me as I ducked out a side exit, watching from around the corner as they walked to his car, arm in arm. I got in my car and watched them from a distance, feeling a mix of rage and hurt that I'd never experienced before. He was all smiles, not a care in the world. He drove a few blocks, then pulled up to a cheap-looking motel. I nearly laughed out loud at the cliché of it all. Really? A motel? But this was perfect. Actual, undeniable proof. I took a few more pictures, then pulled away, finally letting myself breathe. I knew what I had to do next. Back at home, I put everything together. Pictures, messages, screenshots, dates, times. I organized them all, making sure I had the full story in order. As I went through everything one more time, I couldn't help but feel a weird sense of relief. I finally had the truth in my hands. There was no more guessing, no more wondering if I was overreacting or being paranoid. He'd done all of this, every betrayal laid out in front of me, and I had the power now. I wasn't the clueless, naive wife anymore. Around 11:30 p.m., he came home, right on schedule. He walked in, smiling, asking how my night was, like he hadn't just been out with another woman for hours. I looked at him, really looked, and felt nothing but disgust. Part of me wanted to just scream at him right then, throw every piece of evidence in his face and watch him squirm. But another part of me wanted to wait, to make him sit in his own lies for just a little longer. So I played along, telling him I'd had a quiet night, that I was tired and ready for bed. He looked relieved, probably thinking he'd gotten away with it all over again. The next morning, he got up like everything was normal, even made us breakfast. I sat there watching him pretend, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. And then, as he sat down across from me, I slid my phone across the table, open to the pictures of him and his friend from last night. His face dropped, the color drained, and he just sat there, staring at the screen. For once, he didn't have anything to say. I told him I knew everything. About the messages, the subscriptions, the dating apps, even his cousin. He tried to deny it at first, stammering and stumbling over his words. But when I laid out all the evidence, he shut up real quick. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, totally unprepared for this. It felt like a victory, seeing him squirm, finally facing the reality of what he'd done. He started apologizing, saying it didn't mean anything, that he loved me and never wanted to hurt me. But I could barely hear him. Every word felt empty, like he was just saying whatever he thought I wanted to hear to save himself. I told him I'd heard enough, that I wasn't interested in his excuses. This wasn't some accident or mistake. This was a choice he made over and over again. He'd made his bed, and now he had to lie in it alone. I left the table, grabbed my pre-packed bag, and walked out the door without another word. As I got in my car, I felt this strange sense of freedom. It was painful, yes, but also liberating, like I'd finally broken free from this nightmare. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done with him and his lies. Now, I'm sitting at my best friend's place, feeling a weird mix of emotions. I'm hurt, angry, relieved, all at once. Part of me wants revenge, to make him feel the same pain he put me through. But another part of me just wants to move on, to let go of all the toxicity and start fresh. I've already talked to a lawyer just to understand my options, and I'm making plans to get my stuff out of our place without having to see him again. I think that's what hurts the most, knowing that the man I thought I'd spend my life with is someone I never really knew at all. As much as it kills me, I know I'll be okay. I have my friends, my family, and a future that doesn't include lies, betrayal, or broken promises. I might not have all the answers yet, but I'm finally free, and that's more than I could have ever hoped for.